Welcome to my YouTube channel, Shadow Whispers, another video. Home Alone Gone Wrong. True stories that will haunt you. The house stood silent, save for the occasional groan of wood settling under the weight of time. It had been in Olivia's family for generations, an old Victorian structure with tall windows and winding hallways. She had spent countless summers here as a child, chasing fireflies in the overgrown garden and daring herself to explore the basement, where her grandfather stored his collection of antique dolls. Now, at 22, Olivia was spending the weekend alone in the house for the first time. Her parents had left for an anniversary trip, leaving her to look after the place. At first, she welcomed the solitude. It was a chance to relax, catch up on some reading, and finally shake off the stress of her demanding college schedule. But by the first night, the house already felt different. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, the kind that made every sound more pronounced. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the rustling of tree branches against the window, the soft, almost imperceptible creak of the wooden floorboards. Each noise seemed amplified in the absence of human presence. She told herself it was just nerves. After all, she had been in this house countless times before. There was nothing to fear, or so she thought. The first sign started with the lights. Olivia was curled up on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her as she flipped through a worn copy of The Haunting of Hill House. A storm rumbled in the distance, sending flickers of lightning across the night sky. She glanced at her phone. 11:47 p.m. Late but not too late. She would read one more chapter before heading upstairs to bed. Then the lights flickered, a quick dimming, almost like the house was holding its breath. Olivia looked up, waiting to see if it would happen again. The storm, she reasoned. Maybe the power lines were just reacting to the change in weather. But a moment later, the lights cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, its faint glow providing the only source of illumination. She hesitated before standing, trying to remember where the circuit breaker was. The basement. Of course, it had to be the basement. Taking a deep breath, she made her way through the house, using her phone's flashlight to guide her. The stairs leading down to the basement groaned under her weight, the sound echoing in the silence. The air down here was musty, carrying the scent of old wood and something else. Something metallic, almost like rust. She found the breaker panel and flipped the main switch. Nothing. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Then, from somewhere in the darkness behind her, she heard it. A whisper, faint, almost too soft to register, but unmistakable. Someone was in the basement with her, a figure in the dark. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She spun around, phone light trembling in her grasp as she scanned the basement. There was nothing, just the old wooden shelves lined with forgotten boxes, the workbench her father never used, and a broken grandfather clock in the corner. She strained her ears, listening for any movement. Nothing. It had to be her imagination. She had been on edge since the lights went out. That was all. Deciding not to linger, she turned back to the panel, trying the switches again. Still nothing. Frustrated, she exhaled sharply and closed the panel. She'd deal with it in the morning. For now, she'd just use candles and her phone light. But as she turned to leave, something stopped her. The broken grandfather clock. Its hands had been frozen at 3:15 for as long as she could remember. But now the second hand was moving. Tick, tick, tick. Her breath hitched. It wasn't possible. And then, a sudden, sharp noise rang through the basement. Came from behind her. She whirled around, her flashlight catching a glimpse of something. A figure, half hidden in the shadows, impossibly tall, its face obscured by the darkness. A cold paralysis gripped her. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to move. Then, in a voice that sent ice through her veins, it whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The escape. Something snapped inside Olivia. Adrenaline surged through her body, breaking her paralysis. She bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time, nearly tripping in her desperation to escape the basement. She burst into the living room, slamming the door shut behind her. her chest heaving with ragged breaths. This wasn't real, couldn't be real, but her hands were shaking. The whisper still echoed in her ears. She fumbled for her phone, intending to call someone, anyone, but her fingers froze when she saw the screen. A message notification from an unknown number. For words, "Don't look behind you." Olivia's blood turned to ice. She didn't want to look. She couldn't. But then, a soft creak from behind her. The unmistakable sound of someone stepping closer. And as the air around her grew impossibly cold, she realized something. She had locked the basement door, but now it was open. The room was silent, except for the sound of Olivia's own breathing, shallow, erratic, uneven. Her phone trembled in her grip, the words on the screen burning into her vision. "Don't look behind you," but she didn't need to. She could feel it, a presence looming just beyond her peripheral vision. The air had shifted, growing thick and oppressive, like something unnatural had taken root in the very walls of the house. A slow, deliberate creak sounded from the floorboards behind her, the kind of sound made when weight is applied, when someone moves closer. Her pulse pounded against her skull. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her body remained frozen, locked in the suffocating grip of dread. Then the whisper came again. "I see you." A breath, cold and damp, brushed against the nape of her neck. And just like that, the paralysis broke. With a strangled cry, Olivia sprang forward, nearly tripping over the coffee table in her desperate attempt to escape. She spun around, phone light shaking as she swept it across the room. But there was nothing there. No figure, no shadow, only the basement door, slightly ajar, swaying ever so slightly as if something had just stepped through. A terrifying discovery. Her heart still hammering, Olivia forced herself to think. This was not her imagination. Someone or something was in the house with her. The air was charged with a wrongness she couldn't explain, as if reality itself had shifted slightly out of place. The logical part of her mind told her to call for help, but a deep, primal fear whispered something else. It won't help. It's already inside. Still, she dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The line rang once, twice, then static. Olivia pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the screen. Call failed. A sickening chill crawled down her spine. The storm outside hadn't even started yet. There was no reason for the call to drop. She swallowed hard, trying again. Call failed. The silence in the room seemed to stretch, growing heavier with each passing second. And then, tap, 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 3 slow knocks. From upstairs. Upstairs, someone waits. Olivia's breath hitched. She wasn't alone. Every muscle in her body tensed as she turned her gaze toward the staircase. The upstairs hallway was dark, the shadows pooling unnaturally, too thick, too deep. Tap, tap, tap. Again, deliberate and unhurried. The sound echoed from her bedroom. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to move, stepping cautiously toward the base of the stairs. She should run. She should leave the house. But something deep inside her whispered that it wouldn't matter, because no matter where she went, it would follow. Gripping her phone like a lifeline, she placed her foot on the first step. The wood groaned beneath her weight. Then, from the darkness above, a soft voice called her name. Olivia. Her stomach twisted into a cold knot. She knew that voice. It was hers. The mirror. Each step felt heavier than the last, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The hallway stretched before her, impossibly long, the darkness pressing in from all sides. She reached her bedroom door. It stood open just a crack. Inside, the room was dimly lit by the glow of her bedside lamp. Everything looked normal except for one thing. The mirror. It hung opposite her bed, an antique her grandmother had passed down. The glass was old, speckled with tiny imperfections. She had never liked it. There was something off about the way it reflected the room, as if it showed not just what was there, but also something else. And now, staring at it, her blood ran cold, because in the mirror, she saw herself, but the reflection wasn't right. Her mirror self stood perfectly still, too still, her hands hanging limp at her sides. Her expression was empty, her eyes glassy and unblinking. Olivia took a step back. Her reflection did not. Her breath hitched. Then, the reflection smiled. A wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far, revealing teeth that were sharp, jagged. And in a voice that was almost hers, it whispered, "Let me out." The terror unleashed. The air turned electric, humming with unseen energy. Olivia stumbled backward, her back hitting the wall. The reflection took a step forward, not in the mirror, but inside her room. The glass trembled, distorting the image like a ripple on water. Then, a single crack splintered through the center of the mirror. A deep, guttural laughter filled the room, a sound that was her own, yet entirely alien. The mirror shattered, and from the darkness behind the shards, something stepped through. Something that wore her face. Something that should not exist. It reached for her, and the lights went out. The darkness was absolute. Olivia's breath came in ragged gasps as she pressed herself against the wall, her fingers clawing at the smooth surface in a desperate attempt to ground herself. The silence that followed the shattering of the mirror was worse than the sound itself. It was thick, suffocating, unnatural. Then footsteps, soft, deliberate, inching closer. She couldn't see it, but she felt it. An unseen presence moving toward her. Something that had stepped through the broken glass. Something that should not exist outside its reflection. A whisper slithered through the dark. "Olivia," the voice was hers, but it wasn't. A distorted mockery of her own tone, stretched and wrong, like something trying too hard to sound human. Then, a sensation, something cold grazing her wrist. Fingers. She screamed. Blindly, she lashed out, her hand connecting with nothing but air. Her phone. She fumbled for it, pressing the flashlight button, and a weak beam flickered to life, cutting through the black void. She swung it wildly around the room, her breath caught in her throat. The floor was littered with shards of broken glass, each reflecting slivers of light, distorting the shadows that stretched unnaturally across the walls. Then she saw it, her own reflection standing in the mirror frame. The mirror was broken, but the figure remained, grinning at her, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And then, it stepped out, a face that wasn't hers. Olivia's mind struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. The figure standing before her was her. Same hair, same features, same clothes. But the details were off. The skin was too pale, almost waxy. The eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to drink in the light. And the smile, that impossible smile, it stretched too wide, the corners of its mouth pulling further and further back, exposing teeth that were no longer human. The thing took a step forward, its bare feet crunching over the broken glass. Yet it didn't react. No flinch, no pain. "I like it here," it whispered, voice dripping with something ancient. "I think I'll stay." Olivia's pulse pounded. Her body screamed for her to run, but something in that thing's eyes held her in place. Some deep, primal force that rooted her feet to the ground. Then it raised its hand. A jagged shard of mirror glistened in its grasp. Her breath hitched as the thing dragged the glass across its own palm. Blood, if it was blood, oozed from the wound, dark and thick, staining the mirror shard. The thing giggled. "It's only fair, don't you think?" it said, lifting the shard as if offering it to her. A trade. A shudder crawled down Olivia's spine. "No," she whispered. The smile widened. "You don't have a choice." Then it lunged. The chase begins. Olivia barely had time to react. She threw herself sideways, the mirror shard slicing through empty air where she had just been standing. She hit the ground hard, pain jolting through her knees, but there was no time to recover. The thing, her reflection, was moving faster than should have been possible. It didn't walk. It glided, its body twitching unnaturally, like a puppet on invisible strings. Olivia scrambled to her feet and bolted for the door. Behind her, the thing laughed. A high-pitched, ear-splitting giggle that didn't belong in this world. She wrenched open the bedroom door and sprinted down the hallway. The shadows seemed alive, stretching and curling toward her, twisting unnaturally as if trying to grab her ankles. Down the stairs, two at a time. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred with panic. She could hear it following, its footsteps not quite right, as if its feet barely touched the ground. She reached the front door, fingers clawing at the lock. It wouldn't budge. Her mind raced. Her car keys, they were on the kitchen counter. If she could just slam. A force hit the door behind her. The entire house shuddered. Slowly, heart hammering, she turned her head. It stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at her. Then, in a voice that was hers, it whispered, "Run," and it did. The basement's secret. Olivia barely had time to react before the thing charged, its body snapping unnaturally forward as it launched itself down the stairs. She had seconds to react. With nowhere else to go, she threw herself toward the basement door, wrenching it open and diving down the stairs. The air grew colder instantly, as if she had stepped into another world. The musty, metallic scent hit her nose again, stronger this time, too strong. She landed hard, rolling onto the damp concrete floor, gasping in pain. The sound of the basement door slamming shut behind her echoed in the darkness. Silence. The thing wasn't following. Or was it already down here with her? Shakily, Olivia lifted her phone, the flashlight barely cutting through the basement's suffocating gloom. The shelves stood as they always had, dust-covered and forgotten. The broken grandfather clock still sat in the corner, its unmoving hands frozen at 3:15. But something was different. A hole in the wall. She had never seen it before. A gaping, jagged opening, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. And from inside that hole, something breathed. Low, ragged, inhuman. A voice drifted from the darkness. It was never the mirror. Olivia's heart seized. Then, two hands shot out from the hole. They grabbed her ankles and dragged her in. The hands were ice cold. They latched onto Olivia's ankles with an unnatural strength, their grip unyielding, pulling her into the black void beyond the crumbling basement wall. She screamed, thrashing, her fingernails scraping against the damp concrete floor as she fought to resist. But the unseen force was relentless, yanking her deeper into the suffocating darkness. Her phone fell from her grasp, its faint beam spinning wildly before disappearing altogether into the void. And then, she was inside. The world beyond the wall swallowed her whole, a space that should not exist within her house. The air was damp, wrong, thick with the scent of rot. She couldn't see anything, but she could feel it. She wasn't alone. A whisper slithered through the dark, curling around her like invisible fingers. "You shouldn't be here." Then light, dim, flickering, sickly yellow. It illuminated the space in a slow, creeping reveal. Brick walls, ancient and cracked. Rusted pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping something thick and dark onto the floor. The room wasn't large, but it stretched deeper than it should have, as if the space itself defied the dimensions of the house above. And at the far end of the room, there was a mirror, not broken, not shattered, whole. And within its glass, Olivia saw herself. Or at least, the thing pretending to be her. It was waiting, watching. Then it stepped forward. But the reflection behind it did not move. The other Olivia's breath hitched. The thing that had crawled out of the mirror was standing just behind the glass, still smiling that grotesque, too-wide grin. But behind it, something else stirred. A second figure. It was her, but not like before. This second Olivia was different. Her skin was gaunt, stretched too tightly over her bones. Her eyes were sunken, hollow voids that leaked something dark. She was thinner, almost skeletal, her fingers unnaturally long, curled into sharp points. And then, the second Olivia screamed, a blood-curdling, soul-ripping wail that shattered the stagnant air. The sound shook the room, rattling the rusted pipes above, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. The first Olivia, the imposter, jerked its head toward the mirror, and for the first time, it stopped smiling. A guttural whisper hissed from its throat. "You weren't supposed to wake up yet." Then, the mirror cracked, a reality that shouldn't exist. Olivia took a step back, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The cracks in the mirror spread, spiderwebbing across the glass in rapid, jagged lines. The second Olivia, the skeletal one, moved. Her hollow eyes locked onto Olivia's, and in a voice that sounded broken, she whispered, "Don't let it replace you." Then, the glass exploded outward. Shards rained down like glistening daggers, slicing through the air. Olivia shielded her face as a freezing wind howled through the hidden chamber, pulling at her clothes, her hair, her very breath. The imposter lunged. Its grin had twisted into something far worse, its mouth stretching too wide, its skin cracking at the seams, revealing something black and writhing beneath. It wasn't just wearing her face. It was trying to become her. Olivia turned and ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get out. Out of this place, out of the house, away from the thing trying to take her life. Behind her, she heard the imposter chasing, its movements jerky, inhuman. And above it all, a voice whispered, soft, too close to her ear. "You let it in." The escape. The tunnel walls narrowed, pressing in on her as she ran. The air felt heavier, like she was moving through water. She could hear the imposter gaining ground, its nails scraping against the walls. Then, a light, faint, flickering at the end of the passageway. She lunged toward it, her legs burning, lungs screaming for air. She burst through the opening and landed in her living room. She gasped, whirling around. The basement wall was intact. No hole, no tunnel, just the normal, peeling wallpaper and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Had she imagined it? No. Her arms were covered in dust. Her legs were scraped. And then, a sound. A footstep on the stairs. Slow, heavy. Olivia turned just in time to see the figure at the top of the staircase. Her blood froze. It was her, the imposter, standing in the darkness, staring down at her. A slow, dreadful grin spread across its lips. Then, it raised its hand, and in its grip were Olivia's car keys. The final nightmare. Olivia's heart slammed against her ribs. The imposter stood at the top of the stairs, its two familiar features half hidden in the shadows. It grinned, and then it spoke. "Where are you going?" The voice was hers, but not hers. A distorted, hollow mockery of her own tone, stretched and wrong, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. Her gaze dropped to its hand. The car keys dangled from its fingers, swinging slightly, taunting her. A cold wave of terror crashed over Olivia. No, she couldn't stay here. She couldn't let this thing replace her. She turned and bolted for the front door. Her fingers fumbled desperately at the lock, twisting, pulling. Click. The door swung open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the distant hum of the neighborhood, crickets, a faint dog barking, the distant sound of a car passing on the main road. She could make it. She could. The lights flickered off. Darkness swallowed the house. And in that instant, something whispered directly behind her ear. "You think it's that easy?" Ice shot through her veins. She didn't have to turn around to know. It was standing right behind her. The struggle for escape. Pure survival instinct kicked in. Olivia dove forward, sprinting out onto the front porch, her bare feet slamming against the cold concrete. She didn't stop. She couldn't. The car. She had to get to the car. Her mind raced, her pulse hammering as she ran down the driveway, eyes locking onto her vehicle. The porch light flickered once, twice, then died completely. And behind her, the sound of something stepping onto the porch. She reached the car, slamming her hands against the door handle, locked. No. Her breath came in gasps as she spun around, eyes scanning the darkness. The imposter wasn't running. It was simply walking toward her. Slow, unrushed, because it didn't have to hurry, because it knew. It had all the time in the world, and it still had her keys. Olivia's mind screamed for a solution. She couldn't fight it, it wasn't human. She couldn't run forever, it would find her. Then she saw it. The garage. The old crowbar her dad had left behind. If she could just... The breaking point. She darted toward the garage, the imposter's grin widening as it watched. It knew. It was toying with her. She yanked open the side door, plunging into darkness. Her hands flailed along the walls, knocking over tools and boxes. Where was it? A rustling sound behind her. It was inside. She could feel it. She grabbed something metal, the crowbar, and just as she turned, the imposter was there. Too close, too fast. Its hand wrapped around her throat. Olivia gagged, her body lifting off the ground as it hoisted her effortlessly into the air. Cold fingers dug into her skin, squeezing. Black spots swam in her vision. This was it. She was going to... No. With the last of her strength, she swung the crowbar. A sickening crack. The imposter stumbled backward. For the first time, its grin faltered. Olivia dropped to the floor, gasping, vision spinning. She didn't think. She just swung again, and again, and again. The thing shrieked, an unearthly, inhuman sound that rattled the garage walls. Then, the mirror on the workbench shattered, and the imposter screamed, not with pain, with rage. Its body convulsed, cracking, twisting, its shape distorting like a reflection in rippling water. It staggered, reaching toward her, and then collapsed, not onto the floor, but into nothing, like a reflection vanishing from a broken mirror. And just like that, it was gone. Aftermath. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia's body trembled as she lay on the cold garage floor, gripping the crowbar with white-knuckled hands. She could still feel it, its presence, its hunger, but it was gone, or at least she hoped it was. Slowly, shakily, she got to her feet. She staggered back into the house. The lights were still off. The air was heavy, the walls quiet, but something felt different. She stepped into the living room, eyes flicking toward the hallway mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, and only her. No unnatural grin, no second figure lurking just beyond the glass. Just her. Just Olivia. Her body sagged in relief. She had won. Hadn't she? Her eyes flickered downward, and that's when she saw it. The hairline crack at the bottom of the mirror. Barely visible, almost insignificant, except for the fact that it was slowly growing. The end. See you in next story. Thank you for watching.